it's not a question of time. I think that the previous speaker already said a lot that can be said. I'll be quick. What is important is to avoid jumping to conclusions. 20 years ago, we had exactly the same debate on albumin, and we had big titles in English journals saying, well, doctors use a medicine which kills patients. Now, I'm not sure. So that's why I say we have to be careful. We have to be careful in the way we interpret data in specialized literature. This is particularly important. It's not so disclosures, no financial conflict of interests. Now, first of all, colloids versus crystalloids. Now, if we administer these substances, is because we believe, generally speaking, that it's necessary to restore a volume, and there are hemodynamic reasons to support that. Now, of course, we can have a lengthy debate, but I think it's important to base ourselves on what the scientific community said was important variables. So this is what we're going to base ourselves on. Now, what are the different variables that have to be taken in account? The central intravenous pressure colloids, because here again we have to be careful. Let's not jump to conclusions. Now, I think the question was, should we use colloids or not, and not should we use starch or not. So let's not go too fast. Now, colloids such as albumin compared to crystalloids such as saline, well, could help reach some hemodynamic points such as central venous pressure and others too. But even if we study the different tests, the problem is with trials is we have these wonderful articles. People will pay attention to 2-3 keywords in the conclusions, but they won't take the time to read the whole conclusions. And so it's important to explain more. Now, some patients are subject to less failure when you're using a specific substance compared to saline solutions. So I think it's very difficult to say there are absolutely no difference between the two families of filling substances in order to restore cardiovascular homeostasis. Now, I don't know a lot about all that, but what I like to do is to concentrate myself on facts without trying too much to interpret them. When we look at the effects of colloids versus the effects of crystalloids in randomized trials in ICUs, it was done within the context of the sepsis campaign. Well, look at the facts. You can see the findings. Here you have the risk ratio of development of events such as mortality. We are on what we call the neutrality line, meaning there are no major differences between the two. Now, if you see that for septic patients, there are not major differences in terms of mortality between colloids and crystalloids. That is a fact. And it's important to see that the statistics here, which shows the heterogeneity, shows that the heterogeneity is quite high. And for other patients, it's even clearer. There are no differences. You have 0%, no heterogeneity, and P 0.94. So it's nearly 1. So in non-septic patients, according to the available data concerning mortality, it's extremely difficult to say that there is a difference in terms of mortality. I'm not saying that you have to use colloids right away or crystalloids, no. But these are the results. You don't have today data saying that because of mortality rates, you should use colloids or crystalloids. Now, I don't know a lot, and that's why I find it particularly amusing, but our friend Ronaldo Bello, he is the one who invented this. He invented rifle. He said so far it's useless to measure renal function in ICU patients. So our colleagues from Australia, nephrologists, well, it's easy for them because they have this specialized group in Australia. They organize consensus conferences. They developed the rifle, and now Cadigo. But actually, it's all the same thing. So the score it's beautiful. Have nothing to say on it, but let's use it because we were told that's what we're supposed to use. Now, if we use it, indeed, there are 3 categories. You know it better than myself. The first category being patients at risk, and here, same situation. The risk ratio of the event being belonging to the risk category. Well, I'm very sorry, but look at the global risk ratio. Well, it's in favor of colloids. I'm not the one saying that. It's a fact. And there's no heterogeneity in the results. You have 10%. Now, if you take the other category, injury. So the injury category, once again, I'm very sorry, but if I really read what I have in front of me, the risk ratio is still in favor of colloids. And you'll find all the different studies. And you're told that all these studies show you that there is a renal toxicity. Well, maybe, but that's not what the findings say. Now let's take the following category: failure, even being having a dialysis. Well, the risk ratio here is in favor of crystalloids, but the confidence interval is low, very close to 1.01. It's great. I'm finding really great. Now, you all know that, of course. You take a study, you show the findings of this study with a confidence index of 1. What would be the answer? The answer would be no. It's not interesting. Go back. So, could be. But for this Australian study, it's different because it corresponds to the message they want to send. So I think that we have to be extremely careful. And there are more patients who need renal expiration. Chest now. Now that is really great. Easy. Well, I shouldn't say that. Sorry about that. I'm sure you know it all. But when I read chest, the results of chest, what is said? Well, you have less patients, starch compared to saline serum, belonging to the risk category of rifle, or the injury category, or in the failure category, anuria or hemodialysis. Well, I'm very sorry. This is not significant because you're at 0.12 for the p-value. Steve, well, I said to him, Are you sure that P is 0.04? Because concerning the confidence index, we have 1. So are you sure P is not 0.5? The answer was no. It's just rounding up the figures. So this is a study. It's not a study conducted on 10 patients, but on much more. So there should be, well, the results should be more robust. If you take, say, 7,000 patients and you cannot demonstrate for sure that there is a major difference, and for a specific category of patients, the results favor even the other treatment. I'm not here to say that a specific treatment is better than the other. I'm here to say that we have to be extremely cautious and not jump to conclusions. Let's be cautious. Let's not see what we want to see. Now, in practice, you have here a summary of the 4 main trials. VISEP, well, it's only Germany. I'm very sorry, Peter, but it's true. 6, yes, our colleagues from the north, those who see the daylight once in 6 months. Our Australian colleagues, I don't know where Australia is, it's very far away, but they apparently have problems concerning a P value and confidence index. And then there's only one study covering several countries, a bit more France, but others too. It's Crystal. So there were 2 countries for septic patients, another study concerning ICU patients, and yet another. So control groups, that's important. Look at the 2 studies which showed that there was a difference in terms of renal function. Here it was 2 studies concerning crystalloids. Now chest, we're talking here about a normal saline, chlorine, and crystal, it's normal saline and Ringer's lactate, but it's far from the majority. And here again we have to be very careful. We're talking here about different criteria. Let's not jump to conclusions once more. Let's not separate the different components. And you have the crystal study. We can come back to it later on, but you know what the results are. Now, in practice, when you look at mortality 28 days after, you can see what the result is. 90-day deaths, no differences, with the exception of the 6ES study. Here you have P equals 0.04. And in crystal, you get the opposite result. Apparently, colloids seem better than crystalloids. But we're not saying here that colloids actually cure the patients. Now, concerning renal replacement therapy, you can see the results are in bright red. In the last line, you see the results for VISEP and 6ES, crystalloids better than colloids. And in green, you have the results where colloids are better than crystalloids. So in terms of the toxicity of drugs, now, of course, all these products have their own toxicity, but there are also other factors that we should concentrate on. First of all, the role of fluid balance. What's interesting to see is that when balance is positive for a colloid, then mortality is high. Same thing for the risk of having to use extra-renal purification. So I think that we have to continue working on the impact of fluid balance. and toxicity of the product we administer to our patients. And of course, there is this whole debate on balanced versus unbalanced fluids. I won't get into all the details. There are network meta-analysis, meaning we have randomized trials on the same topic. These analyses compare the drugs belonging to the same family. For example, you have different types of drugs, but all belonging to the same family. Now, these network meta-analysis enable us to perform direct comparisons and indirect ones. So we actually looked at the different analysis on the colloids, and it was very interesting to see that thanks to direct or indirect comparisons in terms of being better to other fluids, crystalloids ranked first and albumin ranked second. And you can see that saline is further down. So in terms of filling, if you use a balanced solute, well, this is a topic which requires further work in order to understand if whether the patients should be treated thanks to balanced or unbalanced crystalloids. Now, in critically ill patients, as compared to crystalloids, what we could say is that fluid therapy with the colloids did not change 28-day mortality. It's a difference in terms of cardiovascular hemostasia. And what is really clear, comes out very clearly from different studies, is that less patients belong to risk or injury categories of the rifle scale, and the share of. And according to the data available today, we cannot jump to conclusions. But what we can say is that net fluid balance, well, the less, the better. It's better for our patients not to receive too much fluid. And fluids composition, the more balanced, the better. That is what we can say as of today.
So after the defense plea will call back the prosecutor to the bar, well, I will send him straight away to the guillotine. No, I agree with a lot of things he said. Do read the trials carefully. That sounds good. Okay, there are 3 randomized trials that show more use of hemodialysis, but you're not sure. Okay, no problem. I'm not sure of anything, but now I would say caution. Be cautious. Here we quite agree. You can do just as well with crystalloids, even with the lamest crystalloid that's saline. You can probably do better or just as well. And we should play it safe. You can do meta-analysis. You're very good at meta-analysis. I know that you're much better than I am at that. But since biopsy to the 3 studies that highlight more dialysis, I'm not buying it. I would be cautious. I would err on the side of caution. However, I agree that it's important. The only parameter is that it increases PEC faster. It doesn't show that high tidal volume increases PaO2 faster. No, that's not the same. But in most studies, it's usually mild and transient, but it increases PEC faster. It doesn't convince me to treat patients with that because it will increase CVP faster. I prefer to play it safe. There are a lot of questions, I agree with you, that you can't decide the matter. I say that we should be erring on the side of caution. And since you are showing that it doesn't have an impact on the overall prognosis, and since there's a serious doubt about toxicity, I think it's reasonable to backtrack a little. Of course, I haven't looked at albumin. Are there still a lot of unpublished studies because it's still complicated? I don't know, but I can only talk about what I can see. So no one will be sent to the guillotine, but we should protect patients. Here we can only agree on that. And I certainly won't say the opposite. Safety first for patients. I have no doubts whatsoever about this. However, outside of the fact that sometimes in these pro-con controversies you tend to be a bit stereotypical, but the robustness of the data, especially from the randomized trials on the nature of the renal toxicity of colloids are still uncertain. Of course, we're uncertain, but we should be on the side of caution. There's a very serious doubt. But, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there's a very serious doubt. And I think that we should protect our patients. Yes, but it's the role of FDA and EMEA. They haven't banned the use of these products. I think that we should be reasonable. Yeah, I'm sorry. Will you let us ask you questions? Yes, of course. Are there any questions from the floor? Well, I have one for each of you. Laurent, would you lump correction of the hemodynamic state of a patient in hemorrhagic shock and a patient in a septic shock in the same bag? And you, Jalali, do you think that it's justified to use substances that have not proven their superiority, even in terms of hemodynamic outcomes? Maybe the precautionary principle should prevail here. Laurent, well, yes, about the precautionary principle. There are fewer data and it's less clear. There are more data showing that it leads to more bleeding. They lead to the most bleeding in hemorrhagic shock. Here I agree, we don't have the ideal volume expander. I know saline is the sort of most stupid expander. We should be able to find something better, but in terms of safety, we clearly lack data for this indication, but the doubts are the same. Well, to answer your question once again, I must have read chest the wrong way. But if you reread chest, you'll see that in chest, in the colloid arm, there are fewer patients with cardiocirculatory failure on the one hand, and on the other hand, you'll see that in chest, if you look at the detailed results, there is no significant difference in terms of renal impairment in the crystalloid arm compared to the colloid arm. And in the earliest stages of renal impairment, according to the rifle score developed by the same authors as the chest study, colloids are significantly better. P is 2 or 3 zeros after the down to 2, 3 or 4 decimals. I mean, you all know this Indian painting showing a series of learned men looking at an elephant. Those who are touching the tail think it's a snake. Those who are near the trunk think it's a brush. Those who are close to the chest think it's a wall. We should take a step back and analyze not the results from the data with bias, but we should be objective in our analysis. But you're not meaning that we should wait another 20 years. No, go back to your hotel tonight or go back home and read a paper, and then you can give me a ring. Laurent, Gilali, Laurent. I'm not going to answer, but, well, anyway, I read in the tabloids, says Mr. Payan, that maybe expanders are very important, but maybe fluid balance that you talked about is the most important or one of the most important parameters, regardless of the type of expanders. Okay, no problem. Balanced or not, all right, we'll see. But the balance shouldn't be too positive. Could you say a few words about that? Because in tabloids they said that it was the new first issue. Well, you said it all. You don't need any translation, Didier. You don't even need to read the text, just look at the bars. The more the balance is positive, the more you die, and the more it's positive and the more you need dialysis. We're not reinventing the wheel. We know why we put patients on dialysis. I'll take a step back. We've looked at it for secondary ARDS, and we saw that the more volume there was, the more secondary ARDS there was. Well, okay, you should give crystalloids or not? Well, no, because you give more. Yes, but the volume at which ARDS appeared was much higher for crystalloids than for colloids. And so if at the end of the day you don't give that many more crystalloids even for ARDS, and with a little bit of hindsight, even that doesn't convince me. So you can see balance, okay, yes, but fluid balance for each of the products. I think that there are a lot of very interesting questions here, but we should be careful waiting for the results. This seems to be a fitting conclusion. We need studies to meta-analyze them. You're both very good at it. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
It's not a question of time. I think that the previous speaker already said a lot that can be said. I'll be quick. What is important is to avoid jumping to conclusions. 20 years ago, we had exactly the same